Hi everybody, and thank you for joining us this evening for what I know will be a really wonderful talk. My name is Joanna Mawdsley and I'm Head of Learning at V&A Dundee. Having recently opened just a few weeks ago, we've really enjoyed visitors coming into our museum, flinging open the doors to see our current exhibition, Night Fever, Design and Club Culture. It's been an absolute joy to see so many people of different ages enjoying themselves and engaging with the exhibition in so many different ways. As I'm sure we all know, clubs are critical parts of our cities and towns, often colonising forgotten buildings and spaces, redesigning them and reimagining them for a new generation. The exhibition of Night Fever looks back, and by doing so, it encourages us to look to the future and wonder what might come next. This exhibition positions clubs not just as a critical part of culture, but of society more widely. They are really vital spaces, part of the rich fabric of what makes us all creative, expressive, and connected human beings, and often herald positive change. We're so pleased to take this opportunity as Scotland's Design Museum to shine a light on why clubs matter so much to design history, to the present, and of course to the future. We would, of course, always like to thank all of our audiences, partners, members and donors for their continued and ongoing support. I'll now pass over to my colleague Nichol, who will welcome our wonderful speakers for this evening's talk. Enjoy.
Hiya, hi everyone. Thanks for the lovely introduction, Joe. My name is Nichol Keene and I'm the creative programmer here at V&A Dundee. Tonight we are going to be joined by two entertainment and music legends. Ian Schrager is the co-curator of the world-famous nightclub Studio 54. He's gone on to revolutionise the entertainment, residential and hospitality industries. He's been creating spectacular experiences where design, technology and music meet for a lifetime. Joining Ian is Benji B, a Radio 1 DJ, music director of Louis Vuitton menswear and the founder of Deviation club nights and record label. Their conversation is going to be followed by an audience Q&A. Before I invite them to join us, I just wanted to draw your attention to some of the Zoom functions we're going to use tonight. We encourage you to ask questions throughout using the Q&A function, and as I mentioned, we're just going to address all of those at the end. If you'd like to use the closed caption function, you just need to enable that on your bottom bar, and details of how to use these functions have been posted in the chat. And finally, if you're going to talk about this event online, which we definitely encourage, please do tag us at VA Dundee and use the speaker social links which have been posted in the chat. That is it from me. So without further ado, I'm really happy to welcome Ian Schrager and Benji B on screen. Hi, Benji.
Thanks very much, Nichol. How you doing?
I'm okay.
Good.
Hopefully we'll get Ian's video on in just a second.
Hey, Ian.
Hi, Ian. Just need to unmute you.
Thank you. Hi, Benji. How are you?
Hey, Ian. I'm doing well. How are you?
Great. Thank you.
Where am I talking to you from today?
I'm in at the beach, right outside New York, a couple of hours outside New York, at home.
Amazing. I mean, you already know that I'm a student of nightlife and club culture. So for me, this is a very special talk and an opportunity to ask you all the questions that I wanted to ask after I saw the Studio 54 film. And we're going to do our best to try and get as many in as we can. Obviously, hopefully everyone watching this talk is aware of your incredible career in hospitality and nightlife. And we have a limited time, so I don't think we're going to be able to cover everything. But as the V&A exhibition is entitled Night Fever, Designing Club Culture from 1960 until now, I think it feels appropriate to dive straight into Studio 54 straight away, if that's okay with you.
Of course it is, Benji.
Okay, cool. So, I mean, where do we start with Studio 54, apart from to acknowledge that for all of us in nightlife, it really is beyond folklore. It's sort of like the Woodstock of clubland, isn't it? It's like people talk about it with that kind of if you were there feeling, with good reason. And I think one of the things that people don't often look at with Studio 54 is the time frame. The fact that it was only 33 months in its lifespan. And I once heard you refer to Studio 54 as like holding onto a lightning rod. And that's sort of really puts over the intensity of it. And you know, I think there's for sure been great institutions of nightlife that have lasted much longer, but maybe arguably haven't made as much impact as Studio 54. So maybe we could start with you setting the scene of the time in New York, and also talking about the time frame and the lifespan of the club itself, and whether that short lifespan of 3 years sort of amplified its influence on culture.
Yes, well, New York at the time was in a sorry state. It had barely avoided bankruptcy. It was the infrastructure, everything was falling apart, and it was a kind of very depressing time in New York. And as you know, Benji, when you go through a depressing time, everybody looks for an escape. Everybody looks for something that can cheer them up. But also during that time, it was there was a lot of unrest in Europe as well. So it seemed as if Europe had kind of tipped over, and everybody that wasn't tied down or had roots in Europe rolled into New York. Right. And the same thing happened with California. The country tipped over, and everybody from California rolled into New York. So if it was London's time in the 60s and Paris's time in the early 70s, this was New York's time. So we went over and did studio. It was in a very bad section of town. We picked that section particularly because we didn't think we would have an adverse impact on our neighbors.
Yeah.
It was holding on to a lightning bolt. It was one of those natural hits that just hit the zeitgeist right in the bullseye, and it just took off like a bat out of hell.
And for our younger viewers right now that have visited New York and have an idea of what 54th Street looks like, can you explain how different it was then? Can you paint a picture of West 54th? From what I gather, it was a pretty seedy kind of feeling up there.
It was actually unsafe. Yeah. It was populated by a lot of street people, pickpockets and prostitutes, and it was vulnerable to crime. It was an unsafe area. People who lived in New York didn't go there. You stayed away from it. But, like every city, it goes like a river. It comes and goes and so on and so forth. So, we felt it was the theater. We were in a theater. We took studio and put it in a theater, and that was the most compelling part of the idea.
Yeah, I mean, it's clear to me that from studio to the hotels you've created, it's fair to say that you are known as a master of the experience, an experience creator. And I think one of the things about sort of hospitality and club people is that they try to bring theatre into the club environment, but you literally brought a club into a theatre. And that's something I understood a lot better after seeing the film and hearing like the lighting techs talk. And can you talk to us about how you really lent into that opportunity? Because you bought an old theatre that still had the working light rigs and the auditorium, and how much did that play an element in what you chose to do in space?
Benji, it's so funny. It's like everything in life, there's always a certain amount of luck and opportunistic opportunity involved. When at that time, when we went in and did Studio 54, the nightclub industry was a little bit like in the garage phase. Yeah. And by that, I mean, rock and roll started in the garage. Steve Jobs and Apple started in the garage. And that's where we were. There was only a couple of people it was just when nightclubs were emerging. Discotheques were just emerging. And when we decided we wanted to do one, a competitor of ours told everybody that he was working with not to work with us. And as a result of that, we were obliged to go to another group of creative people who had never worked on a nightclub before.
Right.
And they happened to be Jules Fisher and Paul Morantz, lighting designers that primarily worked in the theater and in architectural things. And that was a seminal event that changed everything, because it was their idea. They came in and they saw the theater. We just liked it as a space, but the rigging was there. The ceiling was 7 stories high. It had a proscenium arch. It had a balcony. And it was they who said to us, well, it's a theater. Yeah. Keep it as a theater. And it was Steve and I who then said, we're going to make the people the stars of this show. And everything went on from there.
I mean, you brought ice and wind and snow, rain, and all sorts of like theatrical elements into there. And, you know, I think for most people in nightlife, in the wrong setting, that could feel, I don't know, forced or cheesy or whatever. But it's, whenever I see the footage of studio, it just looks like this natural theatrical, you know, immersive experience that complements the music, the lights, everything. And so, you know, it's really interesting to hear you talk about the importance of design specifically in club environments and how that contributes to everyone's night out.
Well, it's a devotion to excellence. Whatever we did, we didn't do it halfway. We executed as perfectly as we could humanly possibly attain. And it was so well done. When you do something that runs the risk of being cheesy, but it avoids it, it becomes very strong. And the execution of it and the people that worked there and the creative minds that were involved were just, really, really great. And we were relentless about that. Yeah.
And so how many nights a week were you open at the peak of studio?
We were open up 6 nights a week. We were dark on Monday, like the theater.
I mean, for those of us that have grown up in sort of like, you know, often clubs are open on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, or like, you know, or just on the weekend or whatever. I mean, 6 nights a week. How do you even maintain that from a stamina point of view and create a unique experience every night?
Well, it was difficult. And to maintain the high level of the experience, to not lessen our commitment to excellence, and to continually attract people in the know and sophisticated people that would enjoy it every night. Yeah. So that's why there's not a lot of people who survive owning and running a nightclub, because it consumes its owners. I'm one of the few people, as you, who have survived it. And that was really the reason of it.
So it was 33 very intense months, basically.
Very intense. That's where the holding on to a lightning bolt. It was opening up the club, and from the minute it opened, it was feeding the monster every day.
And so did the cost of putting on these incredible shows and night experiences increase as your ambition increased? And you don't, of course, have to, but how much would something like that cost? I mean, how did you afford to keep sort of like fulfilling everyone's expectation, especially the regulars that had, you know, were there many nights in 1 week?
Well, you know, the actual execution of the light show and the general experience was always the same and kept the same in terms of the commitment to excellence and the money spent. Right. You know, we had a big crew. We had 3 people on the light rail in the back. We had a lighting designer, a DJ. We had a lot of people working back there to be able to pull it off. But it was the parties. It was the special events where we would completely transform the place and take it someplace else. You weren't at the studio anymore. You were a completely different place based upon some idea or theme. And that cost a lot of money and kept getting more and more money. For 40 years ago, some of those parties would cost $300,000 and $400,000 for the night, which would be a few $1 million today. For a one-night party, it was there one night and gone by the next morning. Mysteriously appeared and mysteriously disappeared, because that was the way we kept it current and compelling and continued to wow the people by doing these extraordinary events and to keep upping the level of execution we did.
Yeah. And one of the strongest feelings I get when I look at the images or hear you speak or watch the film or just hear the few people that I know that were lucky enough to attend, or I get this real feeling of freedom, like as the main sort of ingredient to the folklore in a way. Freedom to express yourself, freedom to be who you are, freedom on the dance floor, freedom in the party. And I think for those of us who experience the world now like a more sort of surveilled or policed reality, or whatever word you want to use, it's hard to imagine what it must have felt like and how important that element was to the legend of Studio 54. Could you explain to us what that feeling was like, what the ingredients were that enabled that feeling, and whether you think that could ever be possible again in a major city?
Well, I certainly feel that could be possible again, because I think, we are a species. We have the same instincts.
Yeah.
We require the same things. It has to be adopted and adjusted for the current time.
Yeah.
There weren't certain technologies then. There wasn't cell phones. But it could definitely be the same, because I don't think we've changed in thousands of years. We're still the same human being. We're still the same creatures. You just have to find the kind of modern way of interpreting that. But I do think that everybody has theories of why studio was so successful. But at the end of the day, the whole reason for the door policy wasn't elitist, and it had nothing to do with money, or had nothing to do with status. We were trying to get a bunch of people to come inside that would not hinder anybody else's ability to relax and have fun.
Yeah.
A little bit like people invite people to their home or to a dinner party. But it was that ability to feel absolutely free, to feel protected, to feel you could do anything you wanted, provided it was legal. I now say for the record, but that freedom was what distinguished it. If there were celebrities there, nobody cared. If there was a woman in a ball gown and a tiara diamond headdress dancing with a guy without a shirt on and jeans, nobody cared. Everybody was there to have this feeling of complete protection, security, and to be able to have fun without anybody gawking or bothering them. Yeah. And I consider that today in the hotel business the ultimate luxury, the new luxury, that freedom of from hassles and distractions and being harried. It's the same thing. We respond to that same thing, and that's what made studio so special, in my view.
How do you think, like in this modern age of cell phones and sort of celebrity culture and this polarized world that we're in, what are the ingredients, do you think, that of course you can never force it, but what are the ingredients that give it the best opportunity to happen? Do you reckon that feeling of freedom, that free space again?
Well, it has to be absolutely egalitarian. Right. It's democratizing that freedom. It's making it available and accessible to anybody that gets it and appreciates it. I don't think when we opened studio, that was the very beginning of the age of celebrity. Before celebrities, there used to be movie stars or ball players or actors and actresses and artists. We went through the various things. But then none of that mattered when you were inside.
Yeah.
We assaulted your senses and you were there to have fun and a good time. And nobody cared. Nobody cared about anything, just having a good time. And I think that that's something that can always be done, provided that you have the vehicle that encourages it. And so you'll have some of that now in some of the nightclubs in East Berlin.
Yes,
and some of the nightclubs in Ibiza.
For sure.
So, I think when you feel that freedom that unbridled mayhem and energy, which is just a contagious thing and that human beings love. And I think another critical element of it was diversity.
Yes.
Not just a bunch of rich people, but a diverse group of people who aren't perhaps used to being together, that when you throw that diversity, it creates a spark, something combustible. I'm sure you've gone to parties where there's nothing but a bunch of rich people there, and nothing more boring than that to me.
Yeah, for sure.
Those elements all kind of came together, and it was the screening at the door, unfortunately, that created that partly. It's not politically correct. It got a lot of people very aggravated at us and mad at us because we thumbed our nose up to the traditional power structure and the rich people. We didn't care about them. We just cared about having a bunch of really cool people in there having fun. And I think that's one of the reasons an institutional resentment kind of cropped up, because these big shots were coming there. No, you can't come in. I'm sorry. And they got pissed off.
We got to talk about the door. We have to talk about the door policy because it relates to so many things, obviously the funny stories as well, but really on a more serious level, it's like a social experiment, right? It's like social curation, which I imagine you've pulled into nightclub spaces in your hotels, and the kind of way that you want to curate the sort of people that would like to go to Public or the Edition or any of your properties over the years. But obviously it is a polarizing thing. I mean, Andy Warhol famously said that the Studio 54 door, he said, Studio 54 was a dictatorship on the door and a democracy on the dance floor.
Very well said.
And I've got to show this photo. This is the classic picture in the book that I have to. I mean, obviously this is not showing well on Zoom, but I mean, that's the door of a nightclub.
Benji, it was madness.
I mean, did you ever go outside, or was it only Steve that went outside? Did you ever break?
Steve was out there primarily, but when Steve took a day or two off, I would go out there.
Right.
And it is kind of a very, very difficult process to say no to people.
For sure.
Steve was able to get away with it most of the time. I've seen Steve split up husbands and wives and good friends.
Yeah.
That I look back now, and it's just very difficult to say no and to be able to get away with it. But it really was done with an integrity. It was done to try and have a great party inside. And it was the same kind of discretion and judgment you use when you have a private party in your home. That's right. Okay. But when you do it in public, it gets people aggravated.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I guess if you didn't get in, it feels incredibly elitist. And if you do get in, it feels like the great ingredients for a social experiment, maybe. I'm not sure. But I once did a lecture with Nile Rodgers, and undoubtedly, of course, Nile Rodgers and Chic, one of the composers that soundtracked the period of 77 to 80, the exact lifespan of Studio 54. And he really did spend a lot of that lecture talk speaking about Studio 54. And one of the funniest stories he's told was about the origins of the song Freak Out, which was written by him and Bernard Edwards about not getting into studio the night of New Year's Eve when Grace Jones was performing, who I believe had personally invited them. And they couldn't get in, and they went away and wrote this song. Could you tell that story?
Well, it was... we had a New Year's Eve party. It was the first time that I myself was afraid that there were too many people in there. Yeah. I mean, we were packed in there like sardines. And it didn't help that Grace was 3 hours late to get on the stage. And it was the first time that I was anxious that, gee, boy, I don't want anything bad to happen. It didn't, and we got through it, and it was fine. But we learned the next day that Nichol didn't get in. And of course, those kind of mistakes did happen, and we were embarrassed by it. But but thank God, then he wrote the Freak. Because it was a funny thing, because Niall is a good friend and an incredible talent. It's so funny, 40 years later, when we opened up the Times Square edition, we had Niall perform.
Amazing.
Yeah. But we had those kind of things where real big shots, real important people were turned away. The process has inherent mistakes built into it.
For sure, yeah.
It's unavoidable. Those are all things that, we had to kind of take in stride, because Steve and I were from a provincial area of Manhattan, New York City, Brooklyn, and we were really ambitious and really driven for success. So all of those things, I suppose, were tolerable by us, provided it didn't interfere with the successful arc that we had envisioned for the club.
Well, it seems like a perfect moment to talk about Steve Rabel, the late Steve Rabel, who was your partner in Studio 54. You once described your relationship with him like a marriage. And I mean, from what I understand, he was the sort of more flamboyant character that was the face that you would often see outside or in shots in the press to do with Studio 54, and you were sort of more known as being in the cut, a bit in the back and avoiding the spotlight a bit. Is that a fair summary?
Yes.
Yeah. And so, do you think like that dynamic, that working dynamic, especially when it comes to passion projects that are very intense, is a really good chemistry?
It's perfect. You know what it is? The best partnership, just like the best marriage, is when you complete the other person you're either married to or in a partnership with. The funny thing about it, Steve and I did our first nightclub in Queens. It was a little bit like having a show, be out in the provinces to work out all the kinks to take it into Manhattan. Son of Sam, a serial killer, put a damper on that nightclub. But I remember the first night we opened up this nightclub, I went up to the DJ booth to play with the lights, and Steve went to the bar to hang out with the kids from Queens. And we never had a formal agreement. We never had a very specific division of responsibility. We each just naturally gravitated to what we each felt comfortable with and loved. And that's the perfect makings and foundation of a great marriage or a great partnership. And that continued. Steve loved doing the interviews, dealing with the people, and all of that kind of taking of bows that comes with that. Because I loved him, I never considered that he was taking anything from me. He was doing it because he was better at it. And I was doing what I was doing because I was better at that than him. But together, it was the perfect storm. And we each gravitated to what we each loved doing. And but it wasn't mutually exclusive. Steve was like my instant census. Steve, what do you think of this? He was out there, but he was bright and tuned in and knew everything that was happening. And so we were 50-50 partners. You don't share 50-50 with someone that doesn't carry their weight.
For sure.
And so, we both bounced off each other, and I helped him. He helped me. I remember Halston, the fashion designer, came in the first night, and I was, Steve, there's Halston. Go get friendly with him. Something maybe on the dance floor, something Steve would say, this isn't working. Okay, buddy, I'll take care of it.
Yeah, there must be so many times in your life where the kind of the Studio 54 is obviously always present in our minds, but it kind of comes up in popular culture, and the most recent one, of course, is the show Halston. What did you make of it, and the portrayal of particularly that era and Studio in particular?
There was a lot of untruth in some of the things that they maintained, I guess, for dramatic impact. But what it did, I thought that the actor really caught Halston, the way he talked, the way he smoked the cigarette. I mean, he really, the inflection in his voice, I mean, he was really, really great at it. And it made me realize how really talented Halston was. He had a gift. He had a great eye, because all of the people that were in that film were really part of the creative powerhouse in New York at the time.
Right.
Elsa Peretti, Joe Eula, and the rest. And Halston was a part of that. And what he did, his eye, his recognition of this and recognition of that, it was made me realize how really talented. Halston was probably the only real American aristocrat that I ever knew.
Right.
The other fashion people that I knew were mere mortals, like Steve and I. Yeah. But Halston was truly an aristocrat, and he lived very grand, and everything about him, even the way he did his fashion shows, was really done like the great ateliers of Europe. I mean, he marched to his own drumbeat. So I'm glad people got to see that side of Halston. The other things like dying in an air duct, and those things didn't happen. Yeah. But that didn't really matter, I guess.
Yeah. Do you think, I mean, the list of fashion designers and people obviously is like endless in the book, but do you think that, apart from being the fact that studio was the place to go, do you think that there was a specific kind of symbiosis like between designers and the fact that you were so design orientated in the club, and that a big element of what you were doing was aesthetic as well as like audio? And do you think that played a part in who you attracted?
Yes, I think that the fashion designers, by the way, which were the stars of New York at that time, that right. was the emergence of New York kind of trying to get a parity with London, Milan, and Paris. They were just emerging then. And the stars of the city at that time, the tastemakers, the people that set the cultural tone for the entire city, were the fashion designers. Because at that time, it was very bohemian. It wasn't the city dominated by hedge fund people. Sure. It was a very bohemian place. So when they came in and started frequenting the place, it was like the good housekeeping seal of approval. This is it. This is the spot. And it's so funny, Benji, when we first got started, I wasn't inspired at all by what other nightclubs were doing. I was inspired by the fashion industry. Mm-hmm. It's so funny now, while I'm working, I'm really inspired now by technology companies and the entertainment industry, where there seems to be a lot of fresh new ideas that come out of it, particularly the technology industry. But then, the royalty in New York was the fashion designers.
Yeah. I mean, as a student of nightlife and club culture, I feel like we're all influenced by New York and the lineage of New York clubbing institutions, whether we're old enough or traveled enough to have experienced them or not. I mean, if I had a time machine and I could pick one go and I could choose like the dinosaurs or Tudor England, I'd definitely choose that period in New York for sure, because it's had such an influence. It's like the tidal wave of culture that we're still surfing now. And I think we've discussed so many of, the essential ingredients, the time that it was, the socioeconomic conditions. But the thing I'd really love to talk to you about now is possibly the most important ingredient, which is the music. And the music that soundtracked that period, not only in New York, but in your life. And whether you could talk about the resident DJ at Studio 54, how long they would play for, what was the predominant sound? Of course, we associate 77 to 80 in New York with disco, but how would you describe the sound of Studio 54? And talk to me about some of your favorite records from the time.
The person that deserves the credit for that, by the way, was the DJ that really was the man at the studio, was Richie Kazel. There's a cottage industry of everybody taking credit for a lot of things in and around studio, but it was Richie. And he used to play, there was a lot of things like 110 beats. They like to have 110 beats per minute. The litmus test for us, we weren't trying to be like an English pub. We weren't trying to have a very crowded room where people are drinking and socializing and talking. No, we wanted to create a social mayhem. If the people weren't out on the dance floor, the music wasn't good. Because when the music is good, you can't sit still. You have to get out there. And that's it, very simple. That's the criteria. And Richie was just really great at that. And we never did anything that interrupted the party. We never did anything more, whatever kind of visual things or things we did to kind of what we call create a moment. It was no longer than a minute because we were afraid to stop the party because we were afraid we couldn't start it again. So always on a continuum like that. And the music, even now today in the hotels, the music is the most important thing because, I think the things you smell and hear are things that stay with you and conjure up past times than the other senses. And so they're very important to us. And I think even now in the hotel, the music is just critical. And it kind of brings everything together.
I think one thing that's really interesting as well, when I've heard people talk about that era, specifically in New York, which seems weird now almost, is but the clubs really was the place where DJs would break records. Like songs would live or die in the club. And so in a way, the reaction of clubs like Studio 54 and others would determine the success of a song, and that it wasn't unusual to hear, if a song was a hit song in the club, you could hear it many times in one night, which is also unusual now.
The record companies used to bring us all the music to play, but we wouldn't play it unless we thought it was studio music, no matter what. We just think that we've forgotten, that the reason for going to a nightclub and getting on a dance floor, which is a little bit of a tribal kind of instinctive reaction, is to have great music. And it's because you don't have a lot of things that can distinguish your nightclub from other people's nightclubs. You have the same liquor and various other things. And what you do have that's different is the experience and the music. It's just critical. And it sets the tone. Even today in the hotels, it's critical.
I mean, I can't find it straight away here, but of course there's that iconic picture that many people even that are joining us for this talk might know of Diana Ross in the booth with the mic, literally standing on the DJ booth. And it's that moment of energy that's captured makes me think about all the hundreds of other moments that weren't captured, that you must have witnessed. Were there some memorable performances that you can recall now that were really those, if you were there?
We always used to we didn't really have performances as such. We had, we were a party. We're trying to throw a party. But by the way, in that picture, that was the night before Steve and I went away on our extended vacation. You can see me in that picture with my arm around Diana Ross, trying to prevent her from falling out of it. But I'm looking down. I don't look like I'm having a great time there. But Steve was, of course.
So this was the night before your...
Before we went into the army.
Okay, I found it.
Oh, there's another one. It's not that one. But Steve is there, and I'm right there with Diana, with my arm around her, but I'm looking down, not enjoying the whole evening. There was another one there. But my favorite parties there were always the Halloween.
Right.
Always Halloween, because it was one of the people I worked with said Halloween is when anybody could get into studio because all you have to do is put on a great costume, which
Right.
was true, by the way.
Yeah.
But I always thought there were no holds barred. It was just a lot of fun doing the Halloween parties more than the other parties.
Mm.
New Year's Eve sometime was fun. Valentine's Day party in America was always a little bit more difficult to execute, but Halloween was the best because we really didn't have performances as such.
Yeah.
This was participatory.
Like impromptu PAs, basically, like people
Yeah.
jump on the mic kind of thing, you know. And how many nights would the resident DJ play every night?
Richie played 4 or 5 nights a week.
And that's all night, right? That's like 8 hours or something.
Right. You know, it would be a little calmer the other nights.
Yeah.
But you know, a DJ is a performer. So when you have the crowd, when you're controlling a couple of thousand people and you're getting whoops, and it's like, and the dance floor is packed so that all those people look like one organism, you know, like a heartbeat.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a turn on. But during the week, you know, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday were very, very, very busy. And Tuesday, Wednesday, and Sunday were less busy. They were busy, but it didn't have the same kind of mayhem that Thursday, Friday, and Saturday had.
Right. And so I know that this is like a difficult question. I wouldn't want to be asked it myself about music, but if you had to pick a few records from the era, like just the ones that come up, not the favorite of all time, but just records that really sum up the spirit of Studio 54, what would some of them be? Well,
one of my favorite songs from that time, even though I don't like to talk about it because it has a bad connotation, was White Line.
Yeah.
You know, I just love the bass. I love it. You know, it's just very difficult. It's just a very cool kind of thing. And maybe it's one of the first rap songs, by the way. Sure. But it just has a great bass, real grounding thing. And of course, you know, I love I Will Survive by Gloria Gaynor, and I love both Teddy Pendergrass and Thelma Houston's Don't Leave Me This Way. There are others, but there are a few that really stand out to me.
Yeah. So I guess, like, you know, bringing it into the now, not just pandemic related question, of course, but like in general, what have you observed as the sort of changing attitudes and opinions towards clubbing amongst the new generations? And do you think that your lineage of sort of dynamic design within nightclubs will play a part in, or could play a part in, the next generation of club life?
I definitely think so. I don't think there's going to be any difference that's going to happen with the pandemic. You know, I think it's a human, you know, I think things haven't changed for humans since Noah and the flood. Historically, we go through bad times and we always forget the bad and start remembering the good again. It's just, that's the way it is. I don't talk about that. I don't have any data, just my instinct. But historically, that's the way it has always been. You know, I don't believe in paradigm shifts. They don't happen. We don't change. Adjustments are made, fashion changes, technology changes, but we don't change. So I don't think there's going to be any difference with the urge to socialize. I know about the technology, the cell phones. I know about the dating apps and all those kind of things. Those things all kind of fit in and work with an evolving nightlife scene. They don't change it. Not to my views. Matter of fact, I'll give you a good example, Benji. You know, this communal living and communal workspace that seems to be something popular and current now. You know, I think that's a kind of outgrowth of everybody going to the office and working, not meeting very many people, and going home and getting on your technology and surfing and doing everything you do and don't have any human interaction. So what happens? people want communal workspaces now and they want communal living spaces. It's because those things don't change.
Yeah.
I don't think. Now, I'm not an intellect and I don't know, but I'm just telling you what I think. I don't think there's going to be any change after we get through this pandemic, the same way there was no change after we got through smallpox and after we got through the Spanish flu. I don't think there's going to be a change. I think, yes, the cell phones, you don't have the same privacy. Those are kind of details that you kind of have to kind of deal with to create the kind of environment that let people go crazy.
Yeah.
Let people go mad.
The word I want to pick up on in what you were just saying was instinct. That really struck, with me, because I feel like, I don't want to put words into your mouth, but I feel like so many of the products I've experienced of yours are the result of great instinct and going with instinct. Is that a fair thing to say? And how would you recommend people apply that with, in a world where everyone's encouraged to intellectualize choice,
Intellectualize is a sure thing of disaster. You have to feel and have an instinct for the way things are going. It has to have common sense, but I'm lucky. I am incurably curious about everything. I am a voyeur of popular culture and everything that goes on. There are reasons that things happen. There are reasons for communal workspaces and communal living spaces. They just don't crop up on their own. And I try and think and connect the dots so that it makes sense, because we're on a continuum and one thing leads to another. And I'm lucky enough to have good instinct. Halston had good instincts too with what he did. He felt what people wanted, and a lot of entertainment people also, a lot of business people.
Yeah.
It's funny because you take somebody like Jeff Bezos, and he does Amazon, which is a huge success, and Walmart also tried to do all that stuff over the web. But Walmart thought that the lowest price was the only thing that mattered to people. He didn't get what Jeff Bezos understood, that it was convenience as well as a good price that mattered to people. So what happened is there for everybody to see. It's just a kind of instinct by reading the cultural signs. We all have it. We just have to be curious about it. We have to be observant, and we can't be afraid to do something that hasn't been done before. And you can't listen to anybody who tells you you're crazy to try it.
Yeah. Well, that's one thing I really got from, watching the story of how it was a sort of build it and they'll come kind of instinct thing when you had such a short amount of time to turn around a theater into a nightclub, and whether it was like finding a solution to the license, finding a solution to, not having the lighting designers, as you just said, and getting the theater people in. And, from the highest of the highs which you've experienced and the challenges which you've also experienced, if you could impart any lessons from your nightlife experience to someone that's joining us today or watching this that really wants to start their own club or their own experiential design space, what might they be?
Don't be afraid of failure. Because if you're afraid of failure, you don't venture, you don't try, you get kind of locked up. The things that apply, that resonate with the people, most of which are in the box, are ideas that are outside the box. Because if you're going to give an idea and you're in the box, well, that's what everybody already has. They don't want that. They want something outside the box. They want to be led to what they think is happening. When Henry Ford did the car, that was an outside the box thought. When they invented Post-its or felt tip pens, those were outside the box ideas done by all people that thought outside the box. And I think when you think outside the box, I think somebody said, I think it might have been Winston Churchill, that said, a failure is part of success. And if you're afraid of failure, you'll never have success.
Mm. It's interesting to talk about how you've pulled that into your hotels and you're revolutionizing of that space, really. There's a quote here somewhere from Travel and Leisure. It is possible that Ian Schrager has done more to bring design to the travel experience than any other living person, single-handedly reinventing the hotel as a site of electrifying cultural significance. Travel and Leisure. And I have to say that I would agree in my personal experience, because the first time I really interfaced, I guess, like knowingly with your hotels was when I started going to Miami Winter Music Conference as a kid, like 19, 20 years old. And the sort of holy grail of places you could stay then was the Delano, of course, you know, and that was the goal. You'd made it if you stayed at the Delano, but if you couldn't stay there, then you'd certainly go there for a drink or enjoy the space. And then I had that experience in a lot of your hotels. And I think that before that, travel and hotels were just somewhere I stayed. And then through the experience of your hotels and the boutique hotel experience, they were places you desired, you know, places that you were excited to stay. And so then understanding the lineage that your design and hospitality roots are in nightlife, as someone that's involved in nightlife, it makes perfect sense. So maybe we should use the time remaining to talk about how you really brought in your experience of nightlife, of design of clubs, of the social experiment of combining the right sort of people, and how you fused that into your early hotels, which have now gone into to really influence everyone in hospitality culture.
Well, it's a really good question, Ben, I have to say. You know, the first thing is that my experience in the nightclub helped me because I didn't really have any discernible product to sell. The same thing everybody else had. It was only the experience that we created that distinguished us from what everybody else was doing. And we realized that at that time, there were most of the hotel companies in America were focused on execution. The best execution. Marriott's a good example of that. Walmart's another good example of that. You know, it wasn't about experience, it was about the proficiency of execution. And there were hotels that were based upon luxury. Claridge's, of course, and some of the great London hotels and hotels in Europe, and some in New York as well. They had luxury. Nobody was doing anything innovative. Nobody. And that was just, we saw it. So we were going to do a hotel for our generation. We were going to do something based upon innovation. We weren't going to do it based upon execution. We wasn't going to do it based upon luxury. There are choices out there. We're going to do it based upon innovation, design, and so on and so forth. That was the basic premise. But one thing, a lot of the media thought that my first hotel was Morgan's, which had no lobby. It was an introvert. The second hotel, Royalton, was an extrovert and had a lot of activity in the lobby because we didn't want people to pick up the Morgans and go stay in the Royalton. We wanted to have a hotel with two different personalities. But a lot of people would say, oh, we're trying to do a nightclub in the lobby. No, we're not trying to do a nightclub in the lobby. We're trying to provide a microcosm of the best that city has to offer in the lobby. So all you have to do is come down from your room and go downstairs in the lobby for the best restaurant, for the best bar, for everything. That was the notion, a very simplistic observation.
Yeah.
And that's the way hotels used to be, by the way.
Yeah, but
150 years ago.
Right. Yeah, I mean, the boutique experience, if even just thinking about the names of the hotels that you've been involved with, there's too many to mention. Mondrian, St. Martin's Lane in London, Sanderson, Hudson, Shore Club. I remember that opening as the sort of little brother of the Delano, kind of, in a way, you know.
Right, exactly. Exactly.
And all the way through to Public now, you know, which is your hotel in New York. It's fair to say that you really have changed the way a generation thinks about travel. I think what I found quite interesting was the Edition hotels, because maybe people think of you as, I don't know, whatever word they want to use, disruptor, artist, visionary in the space. And sort of like, usually that's associated with kind of very independent thought and independent business. And so, you know, a lot of independent artists, designers, musicians, anyone in the creative space has often tried to navigate the more corporate world, whether that be major labels or big corporations. And you've really shown that it is possible to do that with that successful marriage between you and the Marriott, which I don't think anyone would have seen coming. And anyone that stayed in an Edition hotel knows that it's like a Schrager experience, from the music through to the drinks through to whatever. So is there any advice for creatives, you know, listening to this talk, of how to navigate that more kind of brutal corporate world from the experience of doing that?
Well, that's the reason I got all this gray hair now. Over the last 11 years. I think my, again, lucky stroke was that the former CEO of Marriott, Arnie Sorensen, who we just lost, loved design. And he was really a great guy, and he appreciated and respected everything, you know, that we were trying to do, and he wanted to do that. It was still a fight, inch by inch by inch, of territory, but I couldn't do it any other way. I can't be involved in something that I don't believe in, that my name goes on. I take it very personal, and I wouldn't do it because I was convinced that they were a supporter of that. You know, the idea started out that they can do what I cannot do, and I can do what they can't do, and we're supposed to be accretive, and 1 + 1 makes 3. You know, I try to do whatever they wanted me to do. I remember one time Bill Marriott wanted me to get dressed in a gray suit with a red tie, and he wanted to be wearing a black T-shirt. I'm not doing that, Bill. I'm sorry. But they were respectful. Not everybody. Some were threatened by it because I was threatening the way they normally did things. But it has been a great 11 or 12 years. I wanted to do it because I had never done something on a large scale like that. It was interesting. It was another mountain for me to climb. But yeah, you know, if the product can't be great, if it can't be distinctive, I don't want to do it, no matter how much money is involved. It's just not about the money. It's about the satisfaction and enjoyment by doing something that you know other people think very highly of. And that's the payoff for me. And I'm sure it's the same with you, Benji.
Absolutely.
You know,
absolutely. 100%.
That's the secret. If you don't have that feeling, then you're not going to be successful. It's not the money. You can't chase the money. You have to do something that you love, and the money comes as a consequence of that.
The funny thing is, you can write the book and you can make the movie, but the experience is a transient moment that you can't actually make permanent, you know. And that's really the magic, isn't it? Is creating these.
Yeah, that's the magic. Because if somebody asked me to write a book about how I did it, I couldn't.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's about massing all the details, and in some moment, they all come together. They add up to more than the sum of the individual parts, and that's when the alchemy happens. And that's what happened with Disney, and that's what happened with Jobs, and that's what happens with anybody that creates something. They can't tell you how to do it, but they kind of know when that magic happens. You know, like my children still watch the same animated films. Those techniques were available to anybody and everybody when Disney was doing it, but they still watch those films 70 years old, and they still are moved by them and love them. Try watching a movie 30 years old. It moves too slow. It doesn't seem contemporary. So It's just, if you can pull off that great product, it lasts forever.
Before we hand over to questions from the forum, I just realized one question we should actually get to is tipping our hat to some of the designers that you've worked with, because obviously we're speaking at the V&A, and this is very much about nightlife and design. I know that you've had a long relationship with John Pawson, and maybe do you want to talk about some of the, whether it be architects, interior people, lighting people over the course of your career that really have had a massive impact on the way that you look at the design of things?
Well, they all have, and I think my choice is to work with the most talented people I could possibly find. I don't think that designers could do what we do. If they could, they would do it. They are designers. I'm not a designer. My job is to get the best work out of that designer. And they all become my friends. They were all brilliant. And we have close personal relationships. And they've impacted my entire life. The first great designer I worked with was Andre Pupman from France. And she was really a great stylist with great taste. And you can see this continuum. The next designer I chose was Philip Stark, who wasn't a stylist, but was a product designer. And when I saw a bathroom that he created in Café Coste in Paris that nobody knew how to use, but was reinvented of a traditional French brasserie, well, that's what I wanted. I wanted to have a reinvention of a hotel room. And I wasn't afraid to underwrite the risk of working with a foreign designer. I thought it even gave me an edge because it wasn't available to everyone, and nobody would have underwritten that risk because they give you the plans in meters, not inches. Their way of bathing is different. They like square pillows. We like rectangular pillows. But that was up to me and my team to edit that out to make sure it was appropriate where it was. Working with Herzog and de Meuron, who did the Tate in London, are absolutely brilliant.
Wow.
It was a very expansive thing working with them. They are really, really brilliant. And they don't have a look like a lot of architects do. They have every project they start all over again and come up with something new. So all these things have been expansive to me. John Pawson, after going through that stage of innovation, three-legged chairs that some people used to fall off of, bathrooms that you don't know how to use because I was trying to get noticed. I wanted to refine and purify and simplify and bring things down to their essence. It's funny, I went to John and said, John, I don't want a minimalist thing. I don't want anything that can be characterized, pigeon-holed to characterize. I want something refined and simple that everybody can understand. And John is a real master at that. With an excellent taste level and for picking really sophisticated, refined materials. So those are four. But all of those people have had tremendous impact on me and has been expansive to me. I worked with Arata Isosaki, who's a great Japanese architect who didn't speak English and who was 13 hours away in time. But my commitment to doing something great was the same commitment they had. And so that made them feel comfortable to me. Just one quick thing. I remember Isosaki, who's really one of the best architects in the world. I had chosen a guy to help me with the colors at the Palladium, which was another nightclub. And I remember Iso, his nickname was Iso, coming to me and saying, through his interpreter, what do you mean? I picked the colors. And I said, well, this guy, he does the colors for the walls of the Metropolitan Museum. He's very sophisticated. You have to prove everything. If this thing is a great, 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 great success, we all benefit from it. If it's not as great a success, you can take all the credit for it. And, and so we went along with it, and he approved it, and it was better for it. I only care about the product.
Yeah.
Nothing else matters. And I think when they have confidence in that, and it makes them feel comfortable around me.
Mm. And so in that art of hospitality, not necessarily just luxury, but just the art of hospitality, what are the key elements? What are the top priority in the creation of these spaces? What are the things that you take away and remember?
I want to tell you how the thing has evolved. When I first got started, it was about innovation. I wanted to get noticed. I wanted people to notice me in this sea of mediocrity and uniformity. I say this, I wish somebody else would say it, but I still think we're the best at that, but there are other people doing it. Most of the people are doing it in just different colors. So I think the most important thing in the hospitality industry right now are experience and service. Service, but not obsequious, pretentious service. Service we talked about before that gives you the freedom of time and the freedom from hassles and feel comfortable and warm about everything. Because we all thought when we were getting all this technology and the social media that it was going to make things easier for us. It hasn't. It's made us more harried.
Yeah.
We have less time than we ever had before. It's an unanticipated result. So I think the freedom from hassles and the freedom of time is the ultimate luxury, not the old traditional luxury of what brand on your clothes, what car do you drive. That stuff's irrelevant. Yeah,
100%. Ian, I've had a great time talking to you. Thanks so much for being so generous with your time. And I hope we can continue this conversation at Public or Edition or somewhere in the future.
Hey, Benji, it was a pleasure to be with you, and it was an honor to have a conversation with you. I have nothing but the utmost respect for you and what you do.
Thanks a lot, Ian Schrager. I appreciate it. I'm going to hand over to Nichol now, who has some questions from our participants.
Okay, great.
That was a wonderful discussion to listen to. The first question is asking who designed the iconic Studio 54 logo, and was there a brief?
We had gone to the designer of the tongue and the mouth, the Rolling Stones, and we went to a couple of other things, but the person we chose was a man called Gilbert Lesser. He was the promotional director of promotion for People magazine at the time. We went out and got 4 or 5 people. We had Fiorucci submit a design. We went out and got people. I would take them through. I explained to him what we were trying to do, and he came through with something that we liked, and we just chose them again by instinct.
The next question is, how much pressure did you feel opening the Palladium in terms of living up to Studio? And did you feel like it was just a whole new start?
With the Palladium,
yeah.
The Palladium wasn't a new idea like Studio was. The Palladium was just more of everything. The Studio 54 cost about $400,000. The Palladium cost $10 million. And we didn't start out with a budget of $10 million, by the way. We were, very much, we had snipping at our heels. We have to do something better than Studio 54, and which is a hard act to follow. And so we overwhelmed people with all the elements we had in it, but it wasn't a new idea. Studio was a new idea.
Okay. The next question is, you were open 6 nights a week. Did you ever manage to get to any other clubs like the Loft or Paradise Garage?
Yes, I did. I used to go out on Friday and Saturday night, mostly Saturday night. Once Studio turned the corner, I used to go out to see what was going on downtown. After hours clubs, gay clubs, went to Larry Levan's club, who, it's so funny, we worked with Larry Levan, who was a great DJ, Benji, but, when we brought him into studio, it didn't hit because he got more enthusiastic when he was in his own club.
Yeah, I mean, sorry to jump in here, Nichol, but I have to, right? Because this is it. It's like the garage and 54, right? So it's like, obviously today's talk we've been focusing on Ian's work with Studio 54, but I want to know like the years of the garage and the years of Studio 54 and what the crossover was. And if there was, I don't know, like a relationship, a competition, a sort of like a Studio 54.
Competition, a respect.
A respect.
There was respect. That place was jumping, and the music was great. And when Larry played down there, he was great. When we brought him up to play a couple of nights at studio, I guess he didn't get inspired. Well, because there was a completely different crowd at the garage than the crowd that we had at studio. But, the DJs are performers, and they react like performers. But his place was really, I'm sure to see the way you just reacted, he was a great DJ, and great music. And I used to go to other places. I started going, it was mostly the gay clubs, because, they had the kind of revelry and tribal, they were there to dance, man. And that was it. And that's what we want. That was the kind of club, that we wanted to do. We wanted to take it uptown. We wanted to make it diverse. And we wanted to take it up a notch in terms of what we had there, more sophisticated, like not like the garage, not the nightclub, but the garage phase of nightclub where you painted everything black and you put on the music. No, you're taking it to the next level.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's just lovely to hear such palpable joy from both of you when you're talking about club culture. It's so kind of wonderful. I think the next question is there anyone that you would have loved to have performed at Studio 54 that didn't, or anything that you would have done differently?
Was there anything that I would have done differently? Only what I got in trouble for. But I would have not done anything else differently. I would not have opened if we weren't 100% ready. Now that I'm a little older, would I let some of the rich guys in? Maybe, but only if they didn't interfere with the rest of the party. But no, I wouldn't have done anything different the way the club functioned. The only thing I would have done differently is that I thought I had my feet on the ground because I had all my same friends, as did Steve. We weren't moving into big this or buying big cars or anything like that. But obviously, we got intoxicated with the whole thing and did some stupid things. I would change all of that because it almost destroyed Steve and I.
The other half of that question, is there anyone that you would have loved to have performed at Studio 54 that you didn't manage to get?
No, we wouldn't do, we didn't really want to do performances there because we did some on New Year's Eve, but that is contrary to having a nonstop dance your bottom off, sweat, nonstop sweaty dancing. And performance stopped that. And so we would never really would have wanted, we didn't really have performances as such. That's a kind of stationary, non-participatory thing. You're looking at it, you're being entertained. We were out for being able to help people go mad and making them feel safe doing it. Because, by the way, there was nothing you could do that night that you couldn't wake up the next morning and walk away from. And so we were there for that. That still would be my approach.
We just got a question come in asking if you still go to clubs.
Sorry?
if you still go to clubs?
No, don't go to clubs anymore. Sorry to say. I know that's very bad for the reputation. I have 5 kids. I have a great wife, and it's so funny. I love my work. I love what I do. I still love it, and I love my family, and I have everything I need, everything I could possibly want. I wish I would have gotten to this point 40 or 50 years ago, but I'm happy at least that I'm at it now.
We've got 2 more questions, and I think that's probably what we've got time for. The first is, what inspired you to create boutique hotels, a concept that was unheard of at the time, but has since become an integral part of travel culture?
It's so funny. Good question. I got drawn into the press were playing up the competition between Donald Trump, who was just opening up a hotel in New York, his first, and this real estate tycoon, Harry Helmsley, the new generation versus the old generation. And I got very drawn into that dispute. And it made me feel, hey, Steve, we can do something better than both of them. And that's when we decided to go into hotels, because in a funny kind of way, it is a progression from nightclubs, where you're taking care of people, providing a great experience, looking after them. Well, that's the same thing you're trying to do with a hotel. So we felt a little bit capable of that, but we just wanted to do something that manifested my popular culture, my generation, my thinking, not my parents, who I love and honor and respect, but they came from a different time. So I had a sister who was 2 years older than me. She was an Elvis Presley fan, and I was a Beatles fan. Things change, and everything changes. Change is the only constant in life. So we thought there was an opportunity for a new kind of hotel, and that was the motivation.
Seeing the gaps and filling them in. The last question from me, and Benji, there probably is a little bit of time if you've got a last question as well, is just, have you got a standout favourite memory from Studio 54?
I have a standout favorite memory from Studio 54. Yes, I remember the first night we opened. I remember Steve whisking me out during the day to get a suit, because I didn't have a suit, and we opened it up, and I always used to leave studio too early, and Steve always used to leave it too late. And I remember going home, at 1 or 2 o'clock. Once I saw the night turn the corner, and it was okay. And I went home, and I got a call from Steve, like at 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning. He hadn't even been asleep yet, and he was telling me that we got the front page of the New York Post, a big picture of Cher on the cover. That was, we did it. We did it, Steve. A very, very, very fond memory of that.
Benji, did you have any last questions?
No, I'm really happy with the chat we've had, and I'm really grateful.
Thank you, Benji. Thank you.
Thanks.
It's been really lovely to have you both. Thanks so much. I think that brings us pretty much to a close. So if you guys want to just turn your audio and video off.
Okay, great.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
And
thank you, Benji, and thank you, everyone, and thank you to the V&A in particular. Now, let me see what I do here.
Thanks, everyone. It was so lovely to have you all here. Thanks to Ian and Benji once again for such a brilliant, fantastic conversation. It was really thrilling. I think a few people mentioned getting goosebumps. I definitely had them. Just to say, we've got lots of upcoming events and talks and tail-8s and so on and so forth around the Night Fever exhibition. A couple of things to note. We've got a free lunchtime talk, which is diving headfirst into Scotland's clubbing culture history, which is called A Defining Decade, Scotland's Clubs 1987 to 1997. That's on the 30th of June. And then we've also got If you're really interested in learning a bit more about the exhibition, we've got a special lecture series in July called Night Fever Behind the Exhibition. Just do check out our website for all the stuff that's up and coming. And the last thing for me to say is to thank you all again for coming, thank our members, thank our donors, and thank our partners. Thanks very much. Have a lovely evening.